that was our last eclipse of the year. We won't be seeing any more eclipses until we get into 2022. And we do have a few coming up.
Yeah, we certainly had enough this year. Boy, there's more than normal, right?
Yeah, there were quite a few this year. And whenever you have an eclipse of either kind, you're either right at the full moon or right at the new moon. So when you get a lunar eclipse, that's, you've got the full moon and the earth gets between the sun and the moon and it blocks it right out completely in a total eclipse. The reverse is opposite with a new moon. It's in the sun, the new moon is in the sky during the day when the sun is up. And so that's when you'll see your solar eclipse, is when the moon gets between the earth and the sun. And the moon's a lot smaller and it's far away and it never completely and totally blocks out a solar eclipse. And that, of course, is why even in a solar eclipse, you never really fully lose that energy of the sun coming down on us. It's mitigated, it's interfered with, but it's certainly not eliminated.
Yeah, so they say it really increases the power of the moon quite exponentially, right?
Yeah, and in a lot of the mythologies and older stories, during the eclipse, the moon is seen to have eaten the sun.
Ah.
Yeah, so it consumes it completely and then allows it to reemerge. For those of you who are looking for cool things in that regard that can stories and that for children, there's a really fabulous little book called Sun God Moon Witch, which is about stone circles in England. It's fiction, but it's about stone circles in England and the power of the moon and the power of the sun, and these two kids that get kind of all caught up in some of the ritual interests and ritual magic. So we had the new moon, and we're now in a new lunar cycle. We're back into a space where it can be okay to be growing things, to be planting and getting things going. Next week, we're going to have Sherry Roy come in and visit with us, and she's going to turn us on to all sorts of things about tower gardening and indoor winter gardening so that we're really ready to get set up and go in that apartment. So today we've got some nice planting, or this week we've got some nice planting windows. Today we're in Capricorn all day. Now we go void, of course, while we're in Capricorn, but not till about, 8 o'clock or so this evening. So certainly nothing to worry too much about. And then we get into Aquarius pretty early tomorrow morning, about 3:45 in the morning. So before most of us are really up and about, we're going to be moving into Aquarius, and we're going to be there for a couple of days. Now, Aquarius, especially in the first quarter, is just fine for planting any of your blooming things. So those of you who are cannabis growers, this is a good window, you want that nice flower, you want it to bloom really well. You can keep that in mind when you're growing when you're planting in Aquarius. For those of you who like to get a real jump on springtime, because we're looking at Aquarius, this could be a good time to start really looking at forcing bulbs. So those bulbs that you put in little pots in the ground, you got a few left over from planting outside, put them in pots, plunk them in the fridge or in another really cold part of the world outside the house, so that in a couple of weeks' time, when they've had that nip of cold, you can bring them in and they'll start blooming for you inside and give you that lovely little hit of summer and springtime. And that's always one of my favorite things to do. I love those little forced blooms in the middle of wintertime. I don't mind that you've tampered with them to get them to do that. You haven't done them any harm because, once they've bloomed, you can let them go dormant. You can put them back in a fairly cold place and you can plant them again in the springtime. So, you're not doing them any harm. You're just giving yourself a little bit of a winter uplift.
That's right. And we all need a winter uplift.
Oh, don't we though? Okay, so then Thursday, early in the morning, the moon's going to go void, of course, about 2 o'clock in the morning. And by 7, when most of us are, thinking about getting up and around and doing things, it's going to be in Pisces. Now, Pisces being a water sign is really hard to match for growing. It really is. So, if you want to start microgreens, if you want to start sprouts, if you've got house plants that need transplanting, if you want to give that Christmas cactus a little bit of a spruce up and get it out where, people can see it and it can respond to the light and give you those blooms that you're hankering for. That Pisces window that goes from Thursday all the way through to Saturday afternoon, that's a wonderful window to get all of those busy planting and transplanting kind of things attended to. Those plants of yours that you've got going in the house that need a drink, this is a good time to give them a drink. The moon's in a water sign, give them some water. Also, we're going to pass into the second quarter of the moon on Friday. So we're still going to be in a waxing moon, but it won't be a waxing crescent anymore. We're going to get rid of the crescent shape, going to hit that halfway mark, and we're going to start seeing that moon fill out. Now, we have a word for the moon when it is in that less than half shape. We call that a crescent moon. And if it looks like the letter D, it's a waxing crescent moon. It's getting bigger because the moon says dock. Okay, so it starts out looking like a crescent in the shape of a D. And that waxing crescent moon becomes that first quarter. Now it's going to start moving into the second quarter. And now it starts bulging. It's not yet full, but it's not bulging. Well, there's a word for that, and that is a gibbous moon. Gibbous. It has nothing to do with gibbon monkeys. Gibbous means it has its roots in Latin, and it means to swell.
To swell.
Yeah, so it's a swell. It will become a swelling moon, a gibbous moon after Friday. So Saturday, we're going to be into the second quarter of our of this moon phase. By the way, this is the cold moon. Okay, we had last month was the hunter moon. Now we're coming into the cold moon. So Saturday, we're going to be full in that second quarter. And about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, around noon, the moon's going to go void, of course, but it's not going to be void, of course, for very long. It's going to slide into Aries fairly early by about 2 o'clock Saturday. It's going to be in Aries and it'll stay there through Sunday. And Aries being a fire sign and it being in the second quarter, not as good planting energy. You could still get away with it if you were working with something in the fruit world, but that's not likely at this time of year where we're not planting fruit trees and berry bushes outside anymore. So try and get your planting or your transplanting or any of your kind of plant sprucing up done prior to then. Once we move into Aries, that's a really good time to let your plants have a bit of a rest. Don't fuss with them too much. If you can do anything, maybe clear off dead vegetation and leaves. But for the most part, you just kind of want to let them then drift on through with theirs. So, we've got a full week of all sorts of wonderful activities that you can still do, even though you can't be outside in the garden.
Wow. And of course, now you got a new calendar you can look at too, right?
We do. The calendars have come in. Okay. So,
Wow.
yeah, this is Garden Like a Guru in 2022. Okay, I think my graphics guy just couldn't resist the opportunity to lapse into a little bit of poetry.
Mm.
Now, every year we feature somebody on the back of the calendar, and this year it's Sherry Roy with our Tower Gardens. Now, Sherry is really, really, really knowledgeable about doing this. She has been feeding her family all winter long with her tower garden for quite a while. And we're not just talking a little bit of, greenery here. She produces cucumbers and tomatoes and peppers and the kind of things that I don't know about you, but oh man, I miss those in the wintertime.
Yeah.
I preserve my tomatoes, I can them, I freeze them, I chop up and dry the peppers and sprinkle them into the soups and stews. But I gotta tell you, it really is something to have a nice fresh tomato in the middle of January, or better yet, February.
So how many of them does she have going? Do you know?
Two.
Two.
And a lot of times one of them is devoted strictly to cannabis.
Right.
Yeah. Not always, but often. So our calendar has a wonderful directory that gives you access to all of the people that are featured in the calendar and a few other ones beside. Now, we're huge advocates for local access, local food, growing things locally, supporting your local farmers. So these are, for the most part, people local to the North Okanagan. And I encourage you to find these kind of resources in your own community. Like a lot of communities will put together a little map that has, your local farms and, access to them. And years and years ago, back when, people weren't so terrified of every government program being, socialism or worse yet, communism being rammed down their throats, we had a Department of Agriculture that had a home economics department as well as an agriculture department, and they were good at this kind of thing. They put together maps of local egg producers, maps of local meat producers, maps of local fruit and vegetable producers. So, something like our little diet directory here, this is really, really crucial for local producers. Now, we start the calendar off with this really informative page that tells you all the things that you need to know when you're using the calendar. This is where you find definitions for void of course. I didn't realize that, the term of course has more than one application in English. And I started having people say, well, why do you say that, of course, the moon's going to go void? Why does it go void, of course? And I was like, okay, I need to explain. Void, of course, means it is no longer attached or influenced by that house of the moon. And it's just drifting through the last little while. So this page here tells you all of those things. It tells you what the different phases of the moon are for, what they look like on the calendar. It gives you all the information about it going through the different houses. What do you do when it's in Aries? What do you do when it's in Aquarius? And it also gives you a whole list of things to do other than gardening with those various moon signs. Okay. Now, I refer to this chart as my magnus opus. Okay. And each and every one of us who does something big in our life tends to have what they see as their as their magnus opus, and this is mine. Now, this little chart took me about 2 years of refinement, and it actually references and uses 7 different gardening guides and books and that I used to use. And so when you go across it, it gives you information as basic as whether it's an annual, perennial, or a biennial. It gives you the Latin name. It tells you what your spacing has to be for planting, what your planting depth is, because so many people, they sink their finger in, up to here and drop the seed in and fill it up with dirt. And I'm like, it's a lettuce seed. It's never going to see the light of day. Most seeds require about 2 to 3 the times it's their width to be buried. So with a squash seed, you have a squash seed, and if you're going to bury it, so they're one of our bigger seeds. Okay, so if you were going to bury a squash seed, you're actually going to go 3 or 4 times the depth of that, not 3 or 4 times the depth of that.
Mm.
And so you're not going to be going in very deep at all. So the chart tells you what depth you should be burying things at, and it gives you how many days to germination, because nothing's more disheartening than going out to your garden day after day after day after day, looking at the row and going, well, when are they coming up? Well, when are they coming up? Well, when are they coming up? And it really helps to know that it might take as much as 2 weeks for your carrots to come through. Whereas if your peas and beans aren't showing up by day 5 or 6, you might need to replant. But I'm sure all of us have had that experience where you go out and you're sure that this is never going to germinate, you replant, and then you have this combination come up and you're like, oh no, I planted lettuce all over on top of my carrots, or whatever you've done. So after the germination time, it gives you the number of weeks to harvest, the number of plants you need to plant per person that you're feeding, which is huge. I had a friend up north who every year she would plant 2 or 3 huge wide rows of kohlrabi. I would be, what are we going to do with it all? It's all right fresh, but good grief, by fall we'd have, people would come running if they saw us approaching, and we were going to put kohlrabi in their purses or their cars, or they'd come to visit and they'd lock the cars so we wouldn't fill the back seat with kohlrabi for them. So how many plants do you need? I've also in this included the ruling planet of each plant, because I feel that that's really, really important, if we're going to make complete connection. And then I tell you how that plant is pollinated, how many plants you need to plant if you're going to be growing out for seed, and what your pollen drift distance is so that you don't plant them too close, and how long that those seeds will keep for you. So this has an entire 7 books worth of information, and right on the facing page, so you don't have to look hard for it at all, is all of the information on how to apply the stuff that is on that chart.
And that's good for anywhere, right?
Oh, yes. The beauty about this chart, and it's included in our date book as well. The beauty about this chart is because it depends on things like what's the nighttime temperature? How many weeks do you need to harvest? because it uses those reference points, it can apply anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you live in Auckland, New Zealand, Canberra, whether you live in Sydney, Australia, or Sydney on Vancouver Island. If the nighttime temperature has to be 15 degrees for that seed to germinate, that's your constant. When that falls is irrelevant. What matters here is when do you hit that nighttime temperature? And then same with weeks to harvest. You know, whether you live in Grand Prairie, Alberta, as I used to, or slightly north of there, or whether you live in Sunnybray, if you need 12 weeks to grow out that particular item, you need 12 weeks. And this can save you a huge amount of trouble and problem, like corn, for instance. You know, corn is a crop that you can get varieties that take 45 days to go from seed to harvest. You also have varieties that take 110 days or 120 days from seed to harvest. So if you live in the Peace Country or up in northern Alberta, you do not want to take a corn, try and grow a corn that's going to take you 120 days to harvest. You're going to look for Yukon Chief, which will come ripe in about 45 days, or Golden Bantam, which will be, you know, giving you a corn between 55 and 65 days. That's just 2 months.
Right.
Oh, you're going to get 2 months without frost up there most years. So, you know, that's your pick. And Yukon Chief is well named. You know, you can grow it to fruition in the Yukon. Yeah. So, yeah. So the you know the beauty of that kind of chart is that it can eliminate so much guesswork, and it's so simple and uncomplicated.
And you can use it anywhere.
Absolutely anywhere. Now, January, we feature a beautiful winter scene from one of our fields out at Cherryville. But I'd like you to also take a look at, you know, what we've done to make your calendar a little more interesting and to give people a little more exposure is what are usually just empty spots on a calendar. We fill them up with local people or people who are in the calendar, you know, that we want to kind of jog your memory. And, you know, like in the middle of January, it might help to remember that, you know, winter ale's a thing. You don't have to wait for summer. Yeah. And, you know, next year we're going to be welcoming the year of the tiger, you know, and fortuitously in the coming year, you know, the new moon at the start of the year of the tiger actually lands right on the very last day of January. So we come into February greeting a new month, a new moon, and a new year in the lunar calendar. Yeah. And then, of course, we follow it up with Imbolc and Groundhog Day, you know.
Right, the important ones.
Yeah, really power pack week. In March, we've gone back to another really lovely vista. Now, our very own Natalie Fleming has taken both of these pictures, and they're just absolutely stunning. We also feature other people in our calendar.
I wonder who that is.
I wonder who these people are, hey?
Yeah.
And if you look down here, you'll see that we've got a little picture. Last year we had Canadian women in cannabis on one of our pages on our calendar. This year, you know, we're still putting them here and there so people don't forget who they are. Our cooperative out of Lumbee. Local cooperatives, people, I can't say enough about local food cooperatives. Join one. If you don't have one near you, form one. The buying power of a cooperative is amazing, and it pulls a community together like no other thing that I can consider. Now, back in the first part of this century, and Tyson, you probably remember this, they were pushing cooperatives very, very hard. They were offering funding for getting cooperatives going here in BC, and especially in the interior. They saw a real need for helping people band together, and we had a few wonderful things grow out of that. The Fieldstone Granary was one of them. But not only that, that information didn't go away. And about 7 or 8 years ago, when we were looking at ways to combat the juggernaut of, a Walmart in every town and, a No Frills in every town and a Save on Foods in every town and, just like corporate, corporate, corporate. And even in a little place like Salmon Arm that has had two really, really good, steady local grocery store distributors. And, there's one in every town. Enderby's had the Red Basket for forever and ever. And, here in Salmon Arm, we've got Askew's and we've got DeMille's. And, in Armstrong, we've got Askew's. And, we've got all these local stores, Byless in Vernon, all of them, they were getting just pounded, and we had to start looking for ways of getting the local word out. And these stores were not interested in local, okay? They just were not. Askew's and DeMille's and the other stores that I've mentioned, they were bringing in local already. So there was this multi-disciplinary group of people, everything from artists and artisans and farmers and makers and all kind of mishmashed together, and we formed the Monashee Community Co-op. And it kind of divided in a very little period of time with people who were, looking at more things other than foodstuffs for the most part. And the one that is still the Monashee Co-op that persists in Lumbee, they handle all organic food. They handle local food, and the prices are just almost impossible to beat. So, we have this lovely graphic with the 7 principles of the co-op. Now, almost every month, we have a little part here that we put in that gives you garden tips that are pertinent to that time of the year. Now, not every month has them because some of them are completely taken up by the thing that's being featured, but most of them have a little bit of garden tips. Then we have Blissful Alchemy, which is a company that makes cannabis topicals. And again, this is a medicine that needs a lot more attention than it's currently getting. Each and every calendar page has on each little square, it gives you where the moon is, what phase it's at. Is it in the first quarter? Is it in the second quarter? What phase is it in? What zodiac house is it in? What time does it go void of course? What time does it enter into the new course? And then on the other side of the square are things like entering the new sun sign. Like here we have on the 21st, that we're going into Cancer on the 21st of June there. So those ones are on the other side, gives you a little bit more clarity so things aren't quite so confusing when you're looking at the calendar. This happens to be one of my favorites. This is actually a bee catching a bit of a nap in a petunia. Mm. Now, we also feature community organizations like Land to Table. And one of the things that's really, really important to remember when you're talking food sovereignty and food security is that the two things are not exactly the same. Food security really is all about food supply, shipping it, moving it, intentionally producing it. But food sovereignty is much more about our own right to have control over our food. And by that, we mean all of our food. So we are talking hunters, we are talking fishermen, we are talking gatherers, we are talking gleaners, wildcrafters. So land to table encompasses much, much, much more than farm to table. These are the people who are helping us tie back into saving our wild salmon, having those wild places for the wild animals to continue to thrive so that they will. And here's our wonderful Sherry, who's going to be with us next week, and information about her tower gardens and some of the systems that are available. And then sometimes, we just can't resist doing an absolutely stunning piece of artwork. Now, I have to tell you, the date book is going to have a lot more artwork than the calendar. It's one of the real beauties of the date book. And because cannabis is part of the entire healing and plant journey, we got this incredibly beautiful picture that shows you just how well cannabis goes in a garden. Okay, you do not need a grow room. You do not need a grow light. Your cannabis will grow beautifully out in the garden. And we finish out the year with this amazing picture of sunrise on solstice morning with Venus as the morning star. Now, when your calendar's hanging on the wall, you remember that wonderful directory and that lovely little cheat sheet that we put right at the very beginning of the calendar? Well, the problem with your calendar when it's on the wall is that cheat sheet is buried way back here. And to access, you'd have to take it off the wall and look at it, except you don't. Because I use calendars all the time, and I found that drove me insane. So we have recreated your little cheat sheet that tells you how to use all of those things. What do all those little signatures and everything on each day actually mean? And because we want you to remember our people in the directory too, you can't go there without seeing this. And that's just a little something that we do. Now, because the calendar costs to print, some of these people have paid for advertising, and this is a way to make sure that our advertisers aren't just buried and not looked at, So that's this year's calendar. Okay.
It looks wonderful.
It does, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Now, the date book is a ring-bound format, and it has all the same wonderful information. Like you can see that on the date book over here, we have, what the moon phase is, what the time signature. Over here, we have, where the moon's at, whether it's going void, of course, what it's entering, and oodles and oodles and oodles of room for you to write up anything that needs to get written up. Every single month starts with this wonderful months at a glance where you can enter in all of your appointments, take all the notes and things that you need to pay attention to. Now, what the date book has that's over and above the calendar is that we have all these wonderful articles in the back. We have articles about goddesses. We have a wonderful coloring collage area where you get goddess mandalas and goddess images to fill in and to play with and get creative with. At the front of the garden, we have seed lists and we have articles about gardening. And because we can actually get away with doing it In the date book, we can include things like stunning pieces of art, wonderful pieces of people's poetry. And this was the first year that we had actually done a date book that we put out an official call for submissions. And oh my goodness, we didn't get near as many as I was hoping for, but the ones that we got were absolutely amazing.
Now, was
And
that poetry and that you were asking for? And
I was asking for poetry,
yeah,
for artwork, for writings, for, little musings, photography. Now, one of our wonderful, wonderful friends from down around Grand Forks has provided me with about a dozen beautiful mandala images. What Alyssa Chris does is she and her partner Adrian, they make essential oils using our trees here in our forest. So they make red cedar wood, they make western red cedar, ponderosa pine, Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir, Douglas fir. They also do lavender, using the lavender from the ashram in the Kootenays. And they do yarrow, which is just amazing. It turns into the most beautiful light blue essential oil. And while they're out in the woods gathering, and it takes hours and hours and hours to process essential oils. So while they are all cooking and that, Alyssa goes about and she gathers things like rose hips and twigs and leaves and stones and acorns. And she makes these beautiful mandalas on the ground with them. And she's chosen to walk a particular spiritual path that I believe has its roots in Buddhism, where you do a lot of intention drawing every day. And these beautiful mandalas that she makes reminds me of this woman that I knew who was of the untouchable caste in India. And so they didn't actually even have a house. They had places that they would stay for 2 or 3 days at a time before they would move on. And every morning, before she would go about any of her other tasks, she would get up and she would light incense, and she would take whatever was at hand around where they were, and she would do a beautiful, beautiful mandala on the ground in front of wherever it was that they were taking refuge, and offer it up to the gods in gratitude and acknowledgement of the beauty of the earth. And I get that same sense of that when I see um, Alyssa's mandalas. And so what we're doing with them is we're placing one at the beginning of each section so we can feature more than one of them. And in the date book and in the date book, there's also going to be a page for future calls for submissions, because we realized that we hadn't put it out early enough, and that if people are aware of it as they're going through the date book, they'll be infinitely more prone to think that perhaps they too can have something of theirs featured in our date book. Again, the basic reason I keep doing these date books and calendars is because I feel the information is crucial. I really feel it's so, so important that we have this good, accurate information if we're going to be using these earth energies in the most productive way in terms of gardening. I think these tools should be useful to us, that they should be accessible, they should be affordable, and they should be actually easy to understand and use. I'd like them to continue to raise people's awareness of Who else is in the community? What else is available to them? Where else can they go to get these kind of needs met? So the more we can build, the more we can incorporate and bring in, the more people who contribute, the more people that we, the calendar really only gives us a very limited space of, 12 to 15 people is kind of about, where we can go with the calendar format. But once we start getting into a date book, how thick do we want it? Like we can, we can feature dozens of people and programs and ideas in something like a date book and still make it so accessible to people and so affordable.
So what you're saying is everybody out there is use the date book as a resource, right, for your local community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I have intentionally not encumbered them with things like recipes and directions on specific things, because my experience with that is your old date books kind of get buried in a drawer. So trying to remember what year of Llewellyn's date books featured that Three Sisters chili recipe that I tried for the Selene Festival and I liked so much. Like I can remember it was a Llewellyn's date book. I can remember that, but I got 10 of them. And so what we're doing in that regard is we're actually working on a much more permanent kind of garden journal that will come with some recipes in it, some things in it, but also a month by month format and lots of space for you to put those sorts of things in yourself as well. And I'm looking at that as being, a project that we're hoping to launch next fall.
I know the one from Banigh Valley, I really liked it, although I must say I haven't been very good at keeping it going. And it's a 10-year one. So each date, is divided into 10 so that you can see exactly what you were doing last year in the garden at that time. It does take consistency. It's really good if it's done in a community where there's more than one gardener and one has that responsibility or makes that agreement to do the record keeping, right?
Yes, indeed. And, years ago there was, and, maybe they still exist. There was a company that sold paper goods like cards and wrapping paper, and they were sold through kind of home sales. People they had a little catalog, and you ordered things from them, and I can't even think of their name right now. But at any rate, they had a keepsake book that they then expanded into a gardening journal. And in the front of each month, there was, and it was all ring bound, in the front of each month was actually an open envelope. And that envelope was for keeping things like your receipts of things that you had bought for your garden, information about, those bulbs that you planted, and like all that paperwork stuff that we just lose. I mean, I don't know about you, but it just goes by the wayside. And so
I didn't have to find out where I put all the seeds, right?
Yeah. And that was the other thing. At the very back of it, there was a very rigid kind of little pocket that you could actually put seed packets in. And it folded down and sealed with one of those little.
I used to have one of those. Yeah, I remember one of those.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at something like that, again, making it very, very easy and useful. But you know what? 2 weeks ago, which was the last time we were on, we told people that we were going to do some sprouting demonstrations and give them a lot more information on sprouting. And I have to fess up to the fact that we're not going to be able to give them a sprouting demonstration because I've done that thing that we all do as gardeners at time. I got busy in other areas, reshuffling things in my house. And my jar of sprouts was left to soak too long and it got kind of scummy and slimy. And my mat of sprouts got neglected and didn't get watered properly, and half of them died, and it looks like a train wreck, not a nice mat of sprouts. So I'm going to reserve doing the sprouting demonstration and all of that until not next week, but the week after, because next week we're going to have Sherry Roy here talking about tower gardens and indoor growing, and then we can just segue right into sprouts and ways that you can grow indoors even without a tower garden to get you going.
All right.
Yeah, so we will indeed be coming back to sprouting, and we will be giving you a really thorough rundown of what sprouting seed collections we've got. And we're going to have about 8 seed collections in our sprouting selections this year. And what I'd like to present you with next week or 2 weeks from now is actual little arrays of each one of them so that you can see what each one of them will look like as they grow out. And it will take about 2 weeks to pull that off. But, you know, we will.
Well, that's great. So I will get I'd already done one batch and harvested it, and it was yummy. My second batch looked like a train wreck because I didn't turn the mat over and use the other. So I've got old sprouts and new sprouts. But I should be ready to do a demonstration on my end too. So that gives me a time to get going again as well.
Yeah, Tyson and I have been talking about the hemp sprouting mat. We get this wonderful hemp fiber. It retains moisture. It grows your seeds really nicely. The sprouts are wonderful. They're easy to either clip or pull off, and they are reusable. But what I neglected to thoroughly cover is that when you have grown one sprout batch on them, you should pluck off as many of those sprouts off of it as you can. Like get them all of them off. Don't leave a lot of them on. But whatever has adhered and is woven itself in, let your mat dry out totally and thoroughly. I tend to put mine above my wood cook stove where I've got pots and pans and other things kind of hanging out and drying, and let it dry totally, thoroughly, and completely. And then that way, that dried vegetation, it's not going to have any mold. It's not going to have any nastiness in it. It's simply going to become part of your grow mat. And that way you can get multiple uses out of your hemp mat. If you don't do that, you can flip it over and grow a second batch of sprouts, but then that's about it. You know, you do start getting too much moisture, you do start getting mold, you do start getting funky smells that you quite frankly don't want.
Right. Yeah, funky sprouts.
Yeah. Now another nice thing about the hemp mat is that it retains enough moisture that you can usually eliminate the plastic dome cover. I will put newsprint or, a large piece of paper or something over top, or another tray inverted upside down over top of my sprouts to get them going if they need the dark. But I find that with the hemp mat that you don't need to put the plastic cover over as much, and indeed it can end up retaining almost too much moisture.
Right.
Yeah. The problem that people run into more than anything else with sprouts is too much moisture, and then you get just your helpful little fungi friends just get in there and they get way too involved and way too helpful.
Yeah, and they're not very helpful.
No, they not when they start doing that, We need that mycorrhizal association, but we really don't want to be eating the mold.
No.
No, indeed.
Well, that's good. So yeah, sprouting is really a great way to have your little indoor garden. So I'm really excited that we're going to do those towers. I think that's very exciting to be able
Yeah,
to learn how to do that.
yeah, and what's the name of that
Hypochlorous acid.
hypochlorous acid?
Yes, and it is
And
now being designated. There's a new brand out for agricultural purposes. So if you're growing those, we have to use a code word for tomatoes. But if
yeah,
you have a tomato indoor farm,
yeah.
then it deals with all the fungi and all the little nasties that can get into the type of feeding system they use for hydroponics.
Yeah,
It will be good for the tower garden as well.
indeed.
So,
Yes, we have a code word for it in one of the groups I belong to. We call it broccoli.
or you call it broccoli. Others call it tomatoes. So,
Yeah, we use the African tomatoes. Yeah. I actually do have a cousin back in the early 70s who left his 2 cannabis plants with his mom. Well, he went off to Europe for a 6-week tour with his girlfriend. And his thinking was when he got back, it would be the right time to take them home and put them under the power lights, and they would be just fine. And his mom lived in a lovely little apartment in Burnaby with a lovely south facing window, and it was all good. And he came back, and oh my goodness, they were lovely. Like Mark was like, oh my goodness, they're just the most gorgeous. I've never had them look so good. And she explained how she had very diligently taken them out onto the balcony every single morning. And he was like, oh no. Thank goodness they weren't in the flowering stage and none of her neighbors knew, and it was up on the 3rd floor.
well, good way to meet your neighbors. Yeah.
Yep, indeed, indeed. And yeah, the tower gardens don't take up a whole lot of room. They take up about a 3-foot circle. So
Right.
one of the things that people don't understand is that even apartment dwellers can do tower gardens.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen systems that are really, really powerful where they're almost 6 feet tall, almost up to the ceiling. So then you can do them in any apartment building anywhere as long as you got light coming through the windows, which is
Yeah.
really exciting. Can you imagine a city that could feed itself? Wouldn't that be incredible?
Well, what one of the things that we've lost, and we went way, way, way down this we've all got to look wealthy road where, everybody had to have a lawn and a pristine house but what we lost in all of that, and you only have to go back and look at the very early photographs that were taken by photographers. Cities have always grown about 70 to 80% of their food. The pictures of Paris in the late 1700s, every balcony drips vegetation, every yard is overflowing, every wall has espaliered fruit trees along it. Those beautiful glass palaces that they built, those incredible Versailles greenhouses, and that they were not just for show. They grew food. And
Yeah.
to this day, you go over to Europe and you stand on a street and you look up and you do not see chrome and steel reaching to the sky. You see balconies and balconies and balconies overflowing with vegetation. And we need to recapture this. We need to understand that. I saw some pictures the other day of Vancouver, in the last couple of years of the war, there was like a montage of, the first year of World War II and then the second year. And, when the Victory Gardens were the biggest,
Yeah.
the fourth year of the war, not the first year. It took people
That long,
4 years to get on board with turning their lawns into gardens. And the biggest gardens were actually the last year of the war and the 3 years following the war.
Yeah, that's important to know. And, that food security time is now upon us once again.
Yep.
Those that are paying attention and learning how to do this has to do not only, well, it has to do with our future, really. And so it's really, really important. And I'm so excited that we have the ability to teach people how to do this. So food security, food sovereignty is really, really.
Absolutely. And even the preppers are coming to the realization that as great as freeze-dried food is, you don't want to live on it all the time.
No, it's really, really not very.
Yeah, you don't want to live on it all the time. It's just great in its own ways. And so, learning to grow your own fresh fruit and your own fresh vegetables all winter long, please tell your friends. Let's promote the heck out of next week's show and, get past the word and get as many people as we can on board with learning how to feed themselves and their families, even when we're in the depth of winter.
All right, now I'll bring on some hypochlorous acid, which is now called SAFE, and be able to. It's called the Safe Disinfectant Company, and we now have it locally. You can order it by the case and have it picked up in Vernon, and I can order it for you, or you can have it by the jug, and I don't ship it anywhere, but it's available to be picked up both in Vernon and in Salmon Arm and Tappan. So
nice. Awesome. Awesome. And look at that, we bubbled up the hour yet again.
Yeah, we did. It's amazing. So I'm really looking forward to being able to learn about those growing and with those towers. So save your money. You need to buy some.
Yep. And now that the calendars are out, get your orders in. I've got about I've fulfilled all the pre-orders, so thank you. Big shout out to everybody who pre-ordered a calendar. You made getting them printed and up a lot more possible for us, and they're in stock. You can get them through Tyhson at the Wellness Academy. You can get them at the Monashi Co-op in Lumbee. You can get them through Blissful Alchemy down in Vancouver. You can get them at Frank's Gift Shop behind Frank's General Store in Cherryville. Gypsy Moon Collective has them in Salmon Arm as well. Wonderful. Absolute shout out to Gypsy Moon. Yahoo. We'll put that on our Facebook page as well. So yeah, the calendars are here and the date books are just a whisker away. So yeah, we're happy with those. And of course you can order them directly from us as well.
All right, we have to call this a wrap. So same place station next week. Come and join us. And until then, have a good, healthy week.
Happy gardening, everybody.
All right, bye for now, everyone.
Farewell.